This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
I want here to examine aspects of materiality and emotion that have remained separated by various divides in recent scholarship. In particular, I'm seeking to draw architecture, materiality, sculpture, and affect into relation. However, I wish to resist the perhaps too hasty notion that emotion is embedded in the object, an idea imposed on matter, but rather to argue that the making of the object lies in its movement, and that in moving it makes. Here, materiality is not to be confused with material culture, with which the humanities are apparently awash. Material culture arose as an imperative to take matters seriously. Ironically, however, in practice, such studies often tend to treat emotion as something that is added to matter, coming after it, or to immaterialise the material in treating it too hastily as instantiation of idea. Objects are still too often treated as mere extensions of and dependent on literary or archival texts that refer to them. Discussion of material culture tends to avoid art in an embarrassed silence, as if material necessarily refers to shrouds and handkerchiefs, aprons and marginalia, indeed to anything other than art and architecture, as if art and architecture were anything but material. Paradoxically, therefore, studies of material culture have tended to ignore the huge resource of artworks, despite the fact that art not infrequently offers a critique of assumptions about materials, matter, and its own materiality. What tends to happen is that affect becomes the hook that is thrown to relate art to material culture, often depending on art as a representation of affect, as in the portrayal of emotion that is located elsewhere. Thus, affect and emotion are treated as that which is represented or embedded within matter, rather than an effect of the work of art. Art, as effective, thus tends to be overlooked. But for me, the principal problem with material culture is that it implies that there is an immaterial culture from which it is distinct, located off-piece, as it were. These problems have arisen largely because of a premature haste in assuming that the material is identifiable with the literal object, and that an object is necessarily given, known, fixed, and stable. Instead, I assume that all culture is material, but the nature of that material is not given. Thus, materiality is not equivalent to the literal object, any more than it is the mere matter of the object. Thus, the question is, how is materiality implicated in the affective? Not in the sense of technique, virtuosity, or fixed function of a stable object, but in productive terms, in which materiality exceeds the literal object, in which matter may work analogously, extensively, and intensively to permit artworks to bear a potentiality that is material. This requires the consideration of the intersection of affect, matter, materiality, and artistic invention, without presupposing that any of these terms are stable. So this paper focuses on a case study in which materiality and the miraculous, marble and relic, surface and salvation intersect in the matter of invention affectively. Stefano Maderno's St. Cecilia in the Basilica of San Vicente. How do I get rid of this?
If you just click on the picture, it should just...
Okay, thank you. Yes.
I need to exit the PowerPoint and...
Okay, I'm sorry, I just have to read it. In this sculpture, in Santa Cecilia in Trastevere, this is one of a series of curious sculptures made partly to celebrate the finding of the relics of saints in 17th century Rome that staged the body of the saint as dead. In these sculptures, body, relic, and art are interfused in the matter of the finding or inventing. This conjunction between the finding of the body and the invention of art that stages that body as a relic draws on effective rhetoric and art theory, and brings to bear and to make matter the relation between materiality and emotional effect. A small group of sculptures located beneath altars in Rome, made between 1600 and about 1680, stage saintly bodies as corpses. In these artworks, in an arresting exchange, sculpture becomes beautiful relic, and relic becomes sculpture. And here I explore the nature and implications of that exchange in relation to the claims of inventio in rhetoric, history, and art. Inventio has been discussed in rhetoric and art theory and practice, but the fact that inventio is also the term used in relation to relics has not yet, to my knowledge, been drawn together with these discussions. So I seek to examine material claims in relation to inventio, to place, and to relic. To start at the beginning is to start at the end. The sculpture shows Cecilia at the moment of her death, and also at the moment of her body's subsequent inventio as holy relic in 1599, proof of Cecilia's sanctity in the uncorruption of her fleshly body, and the potential for redemption of others that a relic gives. 17th century sources insist upon the authenticity of the sculpture as much as on the authenticity of the relic. They insist that the sculpture shows Cecilia's body as it was found on its excavation from the catacomb by Cardinal Paulus Frondati and others. Vidimus, cognovimus et adoravimus, claimed Cesare Baronio. In 1600, Antonio Bozio dedicated to Cardinal Frondati a special publication, The History of the Passion of the Virgin Cecilia, about her martyrdom and that of her saintly companions. His narrative claimed to be, according to what we ourselves have seen with our own eyes and also learned from the trustworthy account of Cardinal Frondati. That is, Bozio presents himself not as witness of the cognitio, but saw the relics when they were displayed for public veneration before being placed under the main altar. In that loculus, he writes, can be seen located the statue of the Blessed Virgin Cecilia, made of white Parian marble. It's exactly how her holy body was found, placed in the old coffin, for it lies, clothed in an extremely gauzy dress that reaches to her feet. She lies on her right side, with her face turned towards the confessio, as if trying to flee the gaze of onlookers. Her head is unfolded in cloth, and one can distinguish her hands extended out from her body, and her slightly raised knees. Despite some evidence to the contrary, the claim advanced is that the sculpture portrays St. Cecilia's body at the moment of death, of martyrdom, and as relic at the moment of discovery. The sculpture, thereby, seeks to combine historical truth, represented by the archaeological discovery of the saint's body, with spiritual truth, her martyrdom, thus coalescing the spiritual origin with the historical, archaeological discovery and collapsing place and event. Or more accurately, it combines two different sorts of origins of the contact point between human and divine. First, the end of the human being on earth, and the beginning of the spiritual being in heaven, the moment when the soul left the body behind, that is, the moment when the body became reliquia, or relic, and second, the inventio of the saint's relics. The sculpture shows spiritual truth, both as confirmed by archaeology, history, knowledge, and place, and as beyond it. History, knowledge, place are radically reconfigured by sanctity. The Basilica of Santa Cecilia in Trastevere, where the statue occupies key position in front of the main altar, is thereby re-inscribed in relation to year zero, back to the beginning, to the origin, and therefore the end of something old and the beginning of something new. St. Cecilia's body bears the wound of martyrdom. That wound is turned to the viewer even as the face is turned away. That wound, like a mouth replacing the mouth, is an opening to something, as if to utter something of the ineffable. The body lies before us, facing us, chastely beautiful, the face swiveled away, the wound marking the turning point between the body and the head, between the visible and the invisible, visible wound and eyes that can no longer see or be seen to not see. The wound is the point of entry to the beyond, the point at which spirit and matter become one. The wound that marks the death of the subject marks the opening to martyrdom, the transformation of body into relic. The relationship between self and other is presented as this gaping slit, this dumb mouth. That wound declares that this self-evidently silenced body must still yet somehow speak. It is, and it shows the void of the unenunciable, a departure from history, a departure, that is, from continuity and human time. The main altar of the basilica thus becomes the point at which historical time, the finding of the body, meets spiritual time through the martyred body, the relic, meeting at that juncture which is severed at the wound. But it's something new that is positioned outside of historical time. It's the end of history and the start of that which is beyond the edge of history. Here, visual analogy represents the embodiment of spiritual faith. Spirituality is embodied at the point where it is disembodied. Modena's St. Cecilia was the first of a small group of sculptures of dead saints. Here they are. The inventio of the artist here works less to imitate the dead body than to authenticate the invention of the relics. This is the art of inventing, as the art of finding, as the art of persuading. Here art is less mimesis than authentication. In a minute, I'll relate this to classical rhetoric, but first let us consider this claim here. I'm emphatically not arguing that these art objects appeal to our emotions and thus work affectively in a straightforward sense. They do not simply represent or convey emotion from A to B. The claims advanced focus on authenticity, history, and authentication. The artworks work to secure historical truth. What is at stake is truth, and how is that truth to be secured? We are used to seeing saints doing saintly things, like this at the saint at the very point of martyrdom, but unmistakably not being burned. And these sculptures of dead saints differ significantly too from works that they might superficially resemble more closely, such as ecstasies or sleeping saints. Instead, these sculptures focus unflinchingly on the saint's body as martyred and dead. Thus, they stage sanctity as a dead, martyred body, a profound form of the imitatio Christi, perhaps, as in these paintings, or in the Kloster Neuburg, Dead Christ. Although, since nothing beyond his foreskin was left of Christ's body on earth, sculptures of Christ, like this, are merely that, sculptures, and cannot enter the register of the relic. Whereas these are sculpture relics. This is sanctity as beautiful corpse, whether deliriously accessible to the viewer, like St. Sebastian, or curiously inaccessible, turned away, like St. Cecilia. This is then saint as relic, or better, not so much saint as relic, as sculpture as relic. What particularly intrigues me about these sculptures then is that this is the art not only of making a body, but of making a relic. It's useful at this juncture briefly to reflect on the relic. Relics occupied an ambiguous position at the crossroads of the mundane and the divine. The saint's relic was at once historical, bearing the gesta of the saint, but it was also celestial, representing someone invisible, omnipresent, and eternally alive. It was this ability to occupy both directions simultaneously, forward and back, heaven and earth, and, unlike Christ, to be still unequivocally embodied, that gave saints' relics their authority and power. Relics were frequently regarded not merely as prompts to holiness, but as the saints themselves, already living with God in the incorrupt and glorified bodies that ordinary mortals would achieve only at the end of time. At the end of the world, the saint's body would rise and be glorified. In the meantime, the saint continued to live and to work through the relic. Crucially, the cult of relics emphasized the body as the locus of the sacred in an ambiguous relationship to place. Rome's claim to be città sancta lay in its concentration of particular holy localities. The classic Roman saint of the Catholic Reform was linked to a specific locus through martyrdom and burial places like these catacombs. Throughout the city were linked to sanctity through blood-stained soil. But the relationship between saint and place via the relic was not simply reactionary, that is, reaffirming place in terms of ancient miraculous events. More than that, it was also productive. Visual depictions of saints and would-be saints didn't simply give form to pre-existing ideas about sanctity, they were a vital part of its production, altering its course. Saints didn't simply make places sacred. In the visualization of sanctity, place, whether a particular locale or a city, was reformulated, made ganz anders. The role of the relic as embodiment of non-homogeneous space is central to a concept of holy space, or the place of the saint, as inherently non-homogeneous and intensive rather than extensive. So if holiness operated through relics to displace place, we need in turn to consider what this might mean for sculpted relics, which work metonymically in terms of place. Writing of relics in medieval religious culture, Alexander Nagel suggests that relics mark a limit point in the system of signs, seeing them in distinction to images, which were eminently replaceable. The relic, he suggests, was defined as the unsubstitutable sign, a sign whose physical relationship to its origin was a necessary part of its meaning. But these relic sculptures work to dissolve the sharp distinction between relic and image that Nagel insists on. In these sculptures, relic and image become as one, and the relic is replicated sculpturally. I turn now to link the invention of relics to invention and effect in rhetoric. In rhetoric, inventio refers to the finding out of topics to be treated and to the arguments devising or contriving. In Cicero's discussion of emotions, he presents the problem of the rhetorician. How can someone deliver himself into transports of anger, sorrow, and other passions, above all when the interests are not his own? Antonius responds, the orator always knows how to evoke in himself the desired emotions, thanks to the strength of his thoughts and of the loci that he employs and develops. That is to say, thanks to inventio. The art of persuading others is first thought of as the art of persuading oneself. In this sense, inventio compels concurrence through emotional persuasion. On one hand, Antonius insists that the orator's feelings not be false. On the other, they are not spontaneous, but are found by means of the loci of the inventio. For Quintilian, as for Cicero, the essential when one wants to move others is to be moved oneself. Quintilian develops a theory according to which emotions are linked to phantasiae, in Latin visiones, by which one can represent the image of absent things, to the point that one has the impression of being able to see them with one's own eyes and of holding them present. Quintilian's formulation of a theory of the phantasiae advances two fundamental principles: that mental representations are available to us, and second, that emotions are provoked by them, which in turn inspire two opposed developments. First, philosophical meditation that aims at combating the emotions, and rhetorical inventio that, on the contrary, seeks to arouse them as much in the orator as in the public. So inventio can be seen to be at the heart of the rhetoric of emotions and of the topic of relics and of their staging. The meanings of the rhetorical term inventio had always teetered between the uncovering of evidence and the figuring forth of falsehood, in the same sort of way that a fact is, in fact, something made. It's time now to return to the sculptures of the martyred saints, swooning so compellingly on their deathbeds in Rome. They demonstrate inventio in several senses. First, in the Ciceronian Quintilian technical sense of formulating a rhetorical argument on the basis of the loci communes. Second, in the poetic sense of imaginative inquiry or insight. And third, in the sense of finding the relic in its correct place. It's important to recall that inventione was the term most frequently used for the discovery or rediscovery of saints' relics. Relics were lost, found, and once refound, recorded in inventories. What was at stake here was chance. The mysterious workings of chance as divine providence and human efforts to track it. Thus, these sculptures invent the relic and its inventive. They invent the body and its relic, locate the place, and stage inventio. The art of art here is to invent, invention, or inventione. Quintilian's point is that by drawing on his own inclination to waking dreams, the orator, at the top of his game and at the conclusion of his case, finally persuades his auditors, by sheer force of spectacle and endaya, that that which is not is, or that his own truth trumps the evidence. This takes us to the heart of the miracle, sanctity, and thus the relic. Miracles cannot be properly authenticated because they are contrary to the rules of nature. Indeed, supernatural, unnatural, monstrous exceptions to natural law. How then can they be demonstrated and defended? These sculptures challenge any easy distinction between image and relic. Indeed, in materializing the invention of the miraculous, uncorrupt body of the saint, they replace the relic, displace the body, and by imitating inventio, they invent the miracle and discover truth. They indicate the re-establishment of an economy that was interrupted by the dividing of heaven and earth. Inventio as revelatio, the body laid bare, or rather the chance of the body embodied in the mysterious workings of divine providence, the inventio of the body of the saint. The effective logic of the sculpture is therefore powerful. St. Cecilia laid bare, truth brought to light. The logic of divine providence as that which can be illuminated must be exposed. A banishing of doubt and dark, that is, a cancellation of history, even as it claims to affirm it.